Will keeping your blood sugar levels stable actually make your fat loss exponentially easier? Inside today's episode, I'm going to discuss some common misconceptions around blood sugar regulation and how people maybe falsely expect to keep their blood sugar flatlined in an attempt to lose body fat. Now, tracking blood sugar, glycemic regulation, all of these things have become increasingly popular with the release of continuous glucose monitoring devices, or CGMs. And because of the metrics that are available, people are monitoring these patterns and trends related to their blood sugar, where previously, maybe certain populations like bodybuilders or diabetics or pre-diabetics may have used something like a glucometer in assessing and evaluating their blood sugar. The CGM has certainly made this more popular mainstream. But there's also a number of different influencers who talk about blood sugar control, and glycemic regulation as a main driver when it comes to someone's ability to lose body fat.
What's up and welcome to Sam Miller Science, where you're joining me just over a decade into my personal journey of working to bridge the gap between metabolism, macros, muscle, and medicine, all while helping coaches scale the impact that they desire and deserve. If you are here, thank you so much for listening and for trusting me to help you elevate your coaching game or to lead you in your transformation to realize your true potential. In either case, each week I'll be sharing my methods, models, and message to serve as leverage for your specific goals. Without further ado, let's get on to today's show.
Now, we know that other things play a role in terms of our overall energy intake, macronutrition, micronutrition, our overall exercise habits and behaviors. But inside today's episode, I'm going to talk about why keeping that flatline blood sugar is not realistic for most people, how we should actually think about blood sugar, and basically looking at this with a more modern perspective. People have gone low carb for a period of time. We've seen there was a rise in popularity in people monitoring the glycemic index, which could have even been the 1990s and early 2000s. And we've moved away from solely hyperfixating on the glycemic index. But now, as we move into 2024 and beyond, it becomes increasingly important to have an advanced understanding of this and not necessarily need to jump to these different things or have to think that we need to be on a ketogenic diet to keep something like glucose stable. And so inside today's episode, I will break down really this misconception around stable glucose means easier fat loss, and we'll also talk about glucose variability. And that's where we'll start today's episode. The first thing we need to think about is the fact that a completely flatline blood glucose is fairly unrealistic unless you're on a ketogenic diet. If this is your goal, you're either going to be very, very disappointed in your readings if you are consuming carbohydrates, or if you're on a ketogenic diet, you are going to have to be fairly restrictive in order to accomplish this. Not everybody necessarily needs to go on a ketogenic diet. It's just something that a lot of people will tend to push in the social media space, especially if they're maybe overemphasizing this particular consideration. If you're not looking to keep glucose flatlined, then you might be thinking, what are some potential guidelines to look for? Now, looking at blood glucose, we have to understand that it is not just about the spike. So after a meal, you are going to see a rise and transient elevation in blood sugar. The goal is to assess what happens afterwards. How long does it take for that blood sugar reading to come back down or basically return to normal after the spike? So for example, let's say you see blood glucose spike to 160 and you see it come down to baseline after about 30-40 minutes and you feel pretty good. That is actually, could be a generally positive situation. That's going to be quite different than spiking your blood sugar to 160 and not having it come down for 3 to 4 hours. Now, I'm not saying that you should shoot or target 160 as a post-meal blood sugar. It's more so just using it as a point of comparison of having your blood sugar elevate and then come back down relatively quickly in 30 to 40 minutes is better than it getting elevated and staying elevated. Now, it could be possible that based on food combinations or a lack of protein or fiber or the size of the meal, your meal timing, potentially how you slept the night before, your activity levels, unless it was just a one-off for that meal, it is possible you could have just had a glucose spike because of the amount of protein, carbohydrates, and fats you were consuming, or lack of protein, lack of dietary fat, lack of fiber. And so we need to look at meal composition, macro composition, and the timing of the meal. And so for most people, a desirable graph over a 16-hour day, let's say they're basically sleeping for 8 hours, they're awake for about 16, would be short little spikes in their blood sugar, and it would come back down, kind of ever so slightly, and usually in a more controlled and timely fashion versus waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 hours for someone's blood sugar to come back down. We do have to be careful that if you do have a ton of extreme hills and valleys, then I'd say there's a lot that we can do from a lifestyle perspective, improving sleep, managing our stress. We could even look at caffeine intake. On the exercise and nutrition side, obviously controlling your nutrition and figuring out certain food combinations and food amounts that are going to be best for your blood sugar is going to go a long way. And exercising is going to improve insulin sensitivity. You can also do little tiny things like going for a walk after your meal in that postprandial setting is really going to help bring that blood sugar down. So let's go through a couple key considerations and how we can look at the value of keeping blood sugar steady, or what we need to do here to accomplish this. So number one, keeping your blood sugar steady will likely help with your mood. Many people have experienced feelings of irritability or they feel hangry. It's kind of like the old Snickers commercials where people would turn into a different character if they didn't eat. I'm not necessarily recommending that you go grab a Snickers when you're hungry or you have low blood sugar. However, you may remember the commercials. These are potential acute effects of blood sugar dropping from a spike. There's also great evidence that poor glucose control over a longer period of time can contribute to depression and anxiety. We're seeing potential acute and chronic effects of blood sugar swings on your mood. The next thing is that we have to look at the potential value that keeping blood glucose steady will likely help your energy levels. Similar to mood, glucose highs and lows can contribute to energy crashes, which can have downstream effects in terms of exercise performance, for example, but maybe even your cognition at work and your ability to maybe keep up with your kids or family, or just feel like you have that steady energy to take on your day. Third key point is keeping blood sugar levels steadier will likely help with cravings and hunger. Having that lower level glucose at the end of a long spike can certainly induce hunger that gets tied in with the irritability aspect that I mentioned earlier. So if you have poor mood, you don't feel great, also food is kind of a reward for us. So when you consider our food reward system and the state of low blood sugar, having lower energy, and then having that blood glucose dip, it is possible that you may be reaching for something that maybe isn't the best choice for your goals. One piece of literature shows that a dip at the end of a blood glucose spike also causes individuals to eat their next meal sooner, eat more at that next meal, and also have a greater overall calorie intake over 24 hours. Glucose spikes can also be a symptom of underlying insulin resistance, which tends to raise our hunger hormone, which is ghrelin. And it's also important to note that insulin resistance puts cravings into overdrive because it can potentially play a role in our brain reward system lighting up, and it's going to have a little bit of an atypical response when food is coming in versus someone who is not insulin resistant and having that regulated. So really all of the 3 points I just talked about can definitely contribute to losing fat indirectly. If you're in a better mood, you have better energy levels, you're making better food choices, if you are able to regulate your hunger, all of those things will play a role when it comes to fat loss. But thinking that you're going to keep your blood sugar completely flatlined, is a little bit of a misconception. And we have to ask, will this directly help with fat loss? Part of this is still going to play into how are we controlling things like energy availability or essentially energy intake relative to our energy expenditure. It's with glucose, it's not going to be a main indicator in overall calories and your energy intake relative to energy expenditure is still going to be of paramount importance. Now, where blood sugar comes into play, and just thinking about hormones in general, but especially insulin and blood sugar regulation, is if you are able to better manage your appetite, you're better able to manage your blood sugar, you can manage your cravings, that is going to make it a lot easier to manage energy intake and the food that is coming into your system, and then your subsequent ability to burn those calories. So when we look at the literature and ask the question, does blood glucose variability affect fat loss if calories are controlled, what do we necessarily find? Interestingly, many studies show that blood glucose alone can't tell us this, but insulin values after a meal might. There was a study that showed that insulin 30 values, which basically shows how high insulin gets 30 minutes after a meal, strongly correlates with weight loss outcomes on specific diets. For example, in that study, individuals with higher insulin 30 values experienced a 9-pound greater weight loss on a low-carb diet compared to a high glycemic load diet when calories were controlled. This was not seen only by looking at fasting insulin or fasting glucose alone. A CGM can give us some cues or clues to pay attention to here. If the glucose is taking a while to come back down, chances are insulin is being secreted. To put this back into perspective though, our main pillars when it comes to a body transformation, someone trying to lose fat, build muscle, is, there are other factors that are equally or even more important than just keeping blood glucose stable or flatlined. It's not to say that blood sugar and glycemic regulation is not important. It is, because it's going to impact your mood, it's going to impact your energy levels, it will impact your hunger, and even your next meal decision based on the current meal that you're eating. But we still need to look at overall, nutrient and caloric density, as well as things like our exercise and activity levels. So if your clients don't have the funds or wherewithal to track their blood glucose, right? Finger pricks with a glucometer can be a little bit annoying. A CGM can be a little bit more costly. If someone's also a beginner and still kind of learning about nutrition, it may not necessarily be the right strategy at the right time. It's not that it's not a good strategy, it's just for someone who's a beginner, we may not need to jump right to that particular strategy. So I don't want you to think that you're missing out on some sort of crazy fat loss hack here. Could it help to create almost like a little report card or a little bit of awareness and feedback tool? I think that's a fantastic reason to consider a CGM, is because there's feedback. You basically make the meal decision, you see what happens, as reflected by some data, assuming you have, an accurate tracker like a Freestyle Libre 3 or something like that. You're able to look at it. You have that real-time feedback or report card, and then it may impact the way people view dietary decisions going forward. Generally focusing on maximizing sleep, stress levels, exercise amount, gut health, food quality, all of these things in and of themselves can help with your blood sugar levels. So sometimes focusing on primary needle movers can improve blood sugar, but hyperfixating on blood sugar may not always improve all of those other areas. Beyond that, biofeedback can also tell us a lot. How is a client feeling after a meal? Or if you're doing this for yourself and you're kind of in an experimentation phase with your nutrition or your training, how you feel in a post-meal setting, whether you're lethargic or energized, can say a lot in terms of your response to that meal. Are you getting irritable, fatigued? Is this something that happens almost immediately, or is it within a couple hours of that meal? We can easily make adjustments by just paying closer attention to biofeedback. Just a lot of people lack education or awareness around biofeedback. That's why I talk a lot about sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress. That little acronym spells SHREDS, makes it super easy to remember as a little sort of learning device. And that way people can track it both in terms of qualitative feelings of well-being, but also assigning some quantitative metrics and rating it on how they're doing on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. So as we're wrapping up, realize there are definitely benefits to tracking blood sugar. That's why, even more advanced athletes will do it at times. Bodybuilders will pay attention to it. And paying attention to how fast or slow we're dropping in terms of our blood sugar. And also the absolute spike, although this is a bit secondary to how fast we're returning to baseline in that postprandial setting or post-meal setting. Things like keeping mood, energy levels, and hunger and cravings stable is definitely a paramount importance when thinking about your meal composition and having this discussion around glucose. The less hashed out benefits are whether or not it will help with fat loss directly for every single person or every single client. There should probably be more research in the area of controlling for calories and then looking at blood glucose, stability and regulation of that and how it's playing a role in terms of fat loss. Because if you weren't controlling for calories, that would be too big of a variable to where then you couldn't necessarily say that glucose and the management of it is what led to extra fat loss. Regardless though, as I mentioned earlier in today's episode, biofeedback can give us clues into our client's status if we are really paying attention and tracking in that post-meal setting. If you find topics like this interesting in terms of blood sugar regulation, glycemic control, energy management, even understanding what happens in that post-meal setting, the release of insulin and how it essentially regulates our blood sugar? Or what happens in a fasted state if we're not consuming a meal, where we get that release of cortisol, catecholamines, and glucagon? If you're interested in those hormonal cascades, but also being able to tie it to nutrition and understand how it connects to your clients' biofeedback and progress in their health and fitness journey, you'd definitely be interested in my nutrition and metabolism specialization program for coaches. This is also known as FNMS, and this specialization program is our flagship program inside of Metabolism School. You can learn more at metabolismschool.com and check it out. It is a live program for health and fitness professionals who are interested in learning more about nutrition, but also the intersection with things like gut health, hormones, our immune system, and so much more. There's a pretty pronounced gap between the world of fitness and macros and the world of Western medicine and even functional medicine. And inside that gray area, there's a lot of capacity for health and nutrition professionals to add a lot of value for clients, distill down some of this information and give them actionable strategies to optimize their health and use lifestyle medicine to their advantage. And that's really where movement, nutrition, stress management, sleep, and supplementation come in. But knowing the right dose of kind of what to use at the right time, the amount of exercise, the appropriate nutrition intervention for them or strategy for them is going to be dependent on understanding their health history and their current biomarkers and using health testing. So if that's something that you are interested in or passionate about or really looking to cement your expertise and develop mastery in that area, head over to metabolismschool.com to learn more. If you're in your own health and fitness journey or you're a little bit newer to this, you're someone who's an enthusiast, you want to learn a little bit more about metabolic health, you want to learn a little bit more about nutrition and how all of these things kind of work together and connect the dots, you can grab a copy of my book, which is Metabolism Made Simple, Making Sense of Nutrition to Transform Your Metabolic Health. That is a great resource if you are either starting out as a health and fitness professional or learning more about nutrition, or you want to connect the dots of a lot of the things you've learned from different books or textbooks or YouTube videos or podcasts, and you really want a way to integrate that knowledge into some applicable strategies, then Metabolism Made Simple may very well be for you. In the meantime, I appreciate you staying tuned to the podcast and being subscribed so you don't miss any episodes. If this has been entertaining, informative, change your perspective, maybe you learned something new, or it helped you pass the time, well, maybe you're doing some chores, driving, or going to the gym, please leave a 5-star rating and review if you're listening on audio. And if you're on YouTube, you can give it a thumbs up, hit the notification bell, and again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you never miss any new content. I appreciate you guys, and we certainly never would have reached 1 million unique downloads without your support or sharing, but also remember that you probably wouldn't have found the show if someone didn't actually share it with you. So that person sharing allowed you to unlock some of this information and use it either in your own journey or potentially with clients, not only in conversation, but you may actually use ideas from this to create your own content as well. So if I've been of any value to you, please support the show by either sharing it or leaving that rating and review. Really goes a long way. We have an entire team that supports the work in creating this podcast. And rather than inundating you guys with ads every 6.5 minutes, we really focus on providing digestible education that can be used to actually improve someone's health. That's really why I started the podcast in 2019, and it's why I still record these episodes today. I appreciate you, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode.